Imagine standing at the gates of your city, heart pounding, eyes wide with terror, as you see a storm approaching, not one of rain or wind, but a storm of men and horses, tens of thousands strong, charging forward under a banner of conquest and merciless wrath. The ground shakes violently beneath their relentless advance, and soon your walls, your defenses, your very hope crumble before the overwhelming might of a force whose brutality would leave entire civilizations trembling for centuries. This is not just an army. It's a harbinger of absolute devastation, led by a man whose name alone invokes dread. Genghis Khan, the Mongol leader whose ferocity in punishment and execution was as ruthless as his conquests were vast. But what exactly were the shocking and barbaric techniques that he employed to instill such unparalleled fear? And how did these brutal methods help shape the largest contiguous empire the world has ever known? Genghis Khan rose from humble beginnings as Temujin, a boy born into a world marked by tribal warfare, betrayal, and violence. Orphaned, abandoned, and betrayed repeatedly, young Temujin learned quickly that mercy was weakness and strength lay in uncompromising severity. From these lessons, he forged a personal philosophy built upon an unyielding rule: total submission or absolute destruction. It was this principle that transformed him from an exiled orphan into the supreme leader of the Mongol tribes, uniting them under a banner of conquest and unmerciful discipline. But how exactly did his harsh punishments become his empire's greatest weapon? To understand the depth of Genghis Khan's cruelty, consider the horrific fate of Jamukha, his childhood blood brother, who later became his greatest rival. When Jamukha was finally captured, after years of bitter conflict, he was not merely executed. He was executed in the most torturous way possible. In a grim ritual known as breaking the back, Jamukha was subjected to having his spine crushed until he died in agony. This was no mere act of vengeance. It was a calculated warning to friend and foe alike. Defy Genghis Khan, and your end would be agonizingly slow and merciless. Genghis Khan's empire was built not only through military brilliance, but through psychological terror. His infamous tactic of human shields, for example, demonstrated a ruthlessness rarely seen in history. When attacking heavily fortified cities, Mongol warriors would round up civilians, women, children, elders, and force them ahead of their advancing troops. Archers on the city walls, facing the impossible choice between slaughtering their own loved ones or abandoning their defenses, were paralyzed by indecision. Many fortresses fell without significant resistance, capitulating not to military might alone, but to psychological torment. In his quest for absolute obedience, Khan's punishments often carried messages so chilling they echoed through generations. One particularly grotesque method involved pouring molten silver into the eyes and ears of enemy nobles, symbolizing punishment for greed and refusal to listen or see reason. Such macabre symbolism ensured that no subject dared challenge Mongol authority. Another notorious punishment, employed extensively during the siege of Urgench, involved capturing enemy soldiers, binding their arms and legs, and stacking them in gruesome living pyramids until they suffocated, crushed beneath the weight of their own comrades. A nightmarish spectacle that served as a vivid testament to Mongol dominance. The siege of Nishapur offers yet another chilling example of Khan's brutality. When his favorite son-in-law was killed during the battle, Genghis Khan vowed not just revenge, but obliteration. Every living thing in Nishapur, every man, woman, child, even animals, was ordered executed. Historian accounts suggest a horrifying toll of 1.7 million lives ended, and the skulls of victims were stacked high into ghastly pyramids as macabre monuments to Mongol wrath. Such barbarity wasn't just retaliation, it was propaganda, deliberately spread to intimidate potential resistance elsewhere in his expanding empire. While other conquerors have used fear as a tactic, Genghis Khan's systematic cruelty was unmatched. His innovative use of public executions ensured that the memory of his wrath outlived his victims by generations. Particularly feared was the boiling alive method, reserved for captured nobles or defiant local leaders who refused to surrender. Victims were slowly lowered into boiling water or oil, their agonized screams echoing across terrified crowds. Witnesses were deliberately spared, allowed to escape and recount the horrors they had seen, ensuring that tales of Mongol cruelty reached distant lands long before the horsemen did. The punishment known as death by trampling became a Mongol hallmark. Defiant captives, especially resistant leaders, were laid upon the ground, tightly bound, and trampled slowly to death by horses. This method wasn't merely brutal. It was a symbolic display of Mongol power, where the very horses that carried Mongol warriors to victory also served as instruments of their terror. Such displays weren't isolated events. They were carefully orchestrated performances meant to crush resistance before it began, instilling a deep psychological dread that was more potent than any weapon. In a particularly infamous incident, the governor of Otrar dared to defy Genghis Khan, killing Mongol envoys in an act of shocking defiance. Khan's response was swift, calculated, and utterly merciless. After the city's inevitable fall, the governor was captured alive and subjected to an excruciating form of torture. Molten silver was poured into his eyes and ears, an agonizing end that lasted hours. Meanwhile, Otrar itself was razed, its population massacred without distinction, leaving nothing but ruins and whispers of the price of defiance. News of Otrar's destruction spread rapidly, serving as a grim deterrent for any contemplating rebellion against Mongol dominance. Another form of psychological warfare employed by Genghis Khan was forcing captured enemies into battle against their own people. Captured soldiers were driven ahead of the Mongol lines, either to face certain death from their countrymen or turn against their own cities, sowing chaos and confusion. This demoralizing tactic fractured enemy morale and weakened defenses, paving the way for Mongol conquest with minimal losses to their forces. To underscore his dominance, Genghis Khan famously instituted the yasa, a brutally strict code of law enforced by draconian punishments. Theft, treason, cowardice, or even minor disobedience often resulted in death by beheading or strangulation with a bowstring, executed publicly to instill obedience and suppress dissent. Even among his own soldiers, the slightest failure, such as retreating without orders, was met with immediate execution. This absolute discipline ensured Mongol armies moved with unparalleled unity and fearlessness, driven as much by fear of their leader as by their own bravery. Genghis Khan also utilized prolonged starvation as punishment, encircling enemy strongholds to cut off supplies completely, forcing inhabitants into desperation and madness. The psychological horror of such sieges broke resistance from within, leaving survivors too weakened by famine to mount any meaningful resistance, and often forcing communities to resort to unspeakable acts of cannibalism to survive. Survivors of these sieges became living reminders of the horrific consequences of resisting Mongol rule, spreading terror wherever they fled. Beyond physical violence, Genghis Khan was a master manipulator of terror itself. His forces deliberately left behind grotesque reminders of their presence: severed heads on stakes, piles of mutilated bodies, burnt and devastated lands, to create an atmosphere of relentless dread. This scorched earth approach ensured that no conquered region could swiftly recover, maintaining Mongol dominance long after the immediate conquest ended. Ultimately, Genghis Khan's legacy of brutality was not simply about inflicting pain or death. It was about crafting a deliberate narrative of unstoppable force, a psychological weapon as devastating as any army. His ruthless punishments and executions were tools that expanded his empire further and faster than mere conquest alone. Yet, in a haunting twist, This very brutality ensured the rapid rise of his empire, but also sowed seeds of resentment and resistance that would eventually fracture his domain from within. The empire built on cruelty would ultimately collapse under its own weight, leaving behind a stark lesson about the destructive potential of power unrestrained by compassion. Today, the horrifying punishments of Genghis Khan remind us of the dark capabilities hidden within human nature, a testament to how the strategic use of terror and cruelty can shape not just an empire, but history itself. His empire, vast and terrifyingly swift in its rise, continues to captivate and horrify modern audiences, serving as an enduring, chilling reminder of the lengths to which ambition and vengeance can drive humanity. As we delve into these brutal methods, we are left to wonder, what other dark chapters of history remain hidden beneath our civilized veneer, waiting for their stories to be told? Yet, beyond the immediate terror instilled by these punishments, Genghis Khan understood deeply that true dominance required both ruthlessness and strategic foresight. Another chilling example is found in his practice of mass deportations. Entire populations of conquered cities, particularly skilled artisans, craftsmen, and educated scholars, were forcibly relocated across the empire to regions where their skills were most needed. This was not merely punitive, but tactical, aimed at weakening enemy territories by depriving them of valuable human resources, while simultaneously bolstering Mongol strength. The psychological trauma inflicted by uprooting entire communities, scattering families, and obliterating cultural identities was devastating, yet it effectively quashed rebellion and rapidly integrated conquered peoples into the Mongol administrative machine, further consolidating Khan's power. Moreover, Khan weaponized humiliation as effectively as he did violence. Defeated enemy leaders were frequently paraded publicly through Mongol camps, stripped naked or draped in humiliating attire, forced to plead for mercy before being executed. This method served not only to punish, but to erode the dignity and morale of opposing forces, reducing once proud commanders to pathetic spectacles that reinforced Mongol superiority. Likewise, enemy flags and emblems captured in battle were desecrated openly, their destruction symbolizing the complete annihilation of enemy pride and autonomy. Such tactics ensured that psychological wounds lingered long after physical scars had healed, permanently crushing the spirit of resistance among conquered peoples. Further emphasizing the calculated nature of Khan's terror was the brutal efficiency displayed in his army's operations. Towns that surrendered immediately upon Mongol approach were largely spared, their leaders swiftly executed, but their populations integrated relatively peacefully into the Mongol system. Conversely, those who resisted faced total annihilation. Their cities systematically dismantled brick by brick, their citizens slaughtered or enslaved. This stark contrast between reward and retribution was a chillingly effective psychological tactic, encouraging cities to capitulate immediately upon the mere rumor of Mongol approach, further accelerating Khan's rapid territorial expansion. One of Genghis Khan's most enduring psychological tactics was the spreading of deliberately exaggerated rumors. Stories of Mongol savagery and monstrous cruelty were carefully cultivated, their horrors deliberately magnified to levels even worse than reality. Messengers and spies infiltrated enemy territories ahead of Mongol armies, spreading vivid tales of impending brutality designed to sap the courage of defenders long before actual conflict erupted. In many cases, these narratives of terror succeeded in destabilizing enemy defenses, ensuring Mongol victories with minimal actual combat. This clever manipulation of fear served as a potent precursor to physical violence, undermining enemy morale and resolve before any battle began. Genghis Khan also cleverly employed strategic leniency as an occasional counterbalance to his pervasive brutality, creating a confusing yet effective psychological warfare tool. Sometimes he would shockingly spare certain captured rulers, allowing them to retain nominal control under stringent Mongol supervision. This tactic generated suspicion and paranoia among conquered subjects, who questioned the loyalties of spared rulers. By alternating unpredictably between mercy and cruelty, Khan ensured his enemies could never anticipate his actions, keeping entire populations in perpetual uncertainty and fear, paralyzed and incapable of coordinated resistance. Ultimately, the unparalleled ruthlessness and carefully choreographed punishments employed by Genghis Khan served a single, terrifying purpose: absolute psychological dominance. His methods were meticulously planned, designed not merely to punish, but to ingrain a deep, enduring fear in the collective consciousness of conquered peoples. This psychological mastery allowed Khan to maintain control over vast territories and diverse populations, making him not only the most feared conqueror in history, but a strategic genius whose brutal methods continue to fascinate and horrify the world centuries later.